And welcome to the Watchman. Well, the horrific terror attacks in Paris carried out by ISIS are still very fresh. 130 people killed, at least 300 more injured in the deadliest outbreak of violence on French soil since World War II. Again, ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attacks in Paris. And folks, we are in a very precarious position right now here in the West, where ISIS is threatening new attacks, not only against Paris, not only against the city of Brussels in Belgium, which was recently on lockdown as counterterrorism police were doing raids there, trying to round up ISIS members and people who were involved in the Paris attacks. Folks, at least 5,000 Europeans, Brits, French, Germans, Swedes, Danes, have left their comfortable homes in Western Europe over the past few years and traveled to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS. What we're seeing now is the steady trickle back. The returnees, battle-hardened, battle-tested. We have warned you about this for years here on The Watchman. We saw this coming. And now these Europeans who have trained with ISIS over there are coming back over here. We saw the bitter fruits of it in Paris. Several of the Paris attackers had fought alongside ISIS. And by the way, two of them at least came into Europe along with Syrian refugees, passed themselves off as refugees. That is how they infiltrated the European continent. Not a very refreshing thought, as the Obama administration is talking about bringing 10,000 Syrian refugees into the United States in 2016 and some 100,000 in 2017. So, can it happen here? Folks, the sad fact is, yes, it can happen here. Let me give you a few statistics. I've shared these in the past on the show, but they bear repeating in the wake of Paris. Number one, the FBI Director James Comey said recently that we have at least 900 cases active right now into ISIS-related activity on American soil in all 50 U.S. states. Folks, wrap your heads around that. That is astounding. 900 cases at least? And this is the FBI director saying it. It's not Stackelbeck saying it. In all 50 states. Wow. Number two, the House Homeland Security Committee here in D.C. released a report recently saying that at least 250 U.S. citizens have left their comfortable homes here, traveled over there to Iraq and Syria to fight alongside ISIS, and dozens, apparently, according to government officials, have already returned. So those are two major red flags for you. We've had at least 70 Americans already in 2015, and the year is not over, arrested on charges of trying to join or carry out ISIS plots here in the United States. So now you know the threat level, you know what we're up against. There's no political savior coming around the corner, certainly not our president right now, in my view, and in 2016 either. Ultimately, God is in charge of world events, and we have to put our trust in God, put our trust in His Son, the Lord Jesus, and pray that He sees us through this difficult, perilous time. Well, what we saw this month in Paris was not the beginning of the mayhem there that radical Islamists have caused. Obviously, we saw the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January 2015, but take it back further, folks. The seeds were being planted, unfortunately, years ago in Paris for these kinds of horrific terrorist acts. My CBN colleague Dale Hurd filed this report from Paris way back in 2010, and boy, was he ahead of the curve. Take a look.
This is a Friday in Paris, filmed by hidden camera. The streets are blocked by a huge crowd of Muslim worshippers, and it's enforced by private security. This is all illegal in France: the public worship, the blocked streets, and the private security. But the police have been ordered not to intervene. It shows that even though some in the French government want to get tough with the Muslims and ban the burqa, other parts of the French government continue to give Islam privileged status. An ordinary French citizen who was watching the Islamization of Paris decided that the world needed to see what was happening to his city. So he bought a hidden camera and started posting the videos on YouTube. His life has been threatened, and so we're concealing his identity. He uses the alias of Maxime Lepant.
They are blocking the streets with barriers. They are praying on the ground, and the inhabitants of this district cannot leave their home nor go into their home during those prayers. The Muslims who are taking over those streets do not have any authorization. They do not go to the police headquarters, so it's completely illegal.
These Muslims have been granted unofficial rights that no Christian group is likely to get under France's laïcité or secularism law.
So it says people have the right to share any belief they want, any religion, but they have to practice at home or in the mosque, synagogues, churches, and so on.
Some say these Muslims must pray in the street because they need a larger mosque, but Maxime has observed cars coming from other parts of Paris, and he believes it's a weekly display of Muslim power.
They are coming there to show that they can take over some French streets, to show that they can conquer a part of the French territory.
If France faces an Islamic future, it took a Russian to write about it. It's the best-selling novel The Mosque of Notre Dame, 2048, a bestseller in Russia, not in France. The French publisher Joel Rosenberg says the French media ignored the book for being politically incorrect.
So Islam is seen as the religion of the poor people. And so you can't say to the poor people, you're wrong, otherwise you're a fascist. That's how it goes.
The book lays out a dark future when France has become a Muslim nation and the famous cathedral has been turned into a mosque. Whether that plot is far-fetched depends on whom you ask. Muslims are said to be no more than 10% of the French population, although no one knows for sure because French law prohibits population counts by religion. But the birth rate for Muslims is significantly higher than for native French. Some Muslim men are said to practice polygamy, a charge this man faced, in some cases with each extra wife having children and collecting a welfare check.
With Islam, it's not only a problem of numbers. The problem of Islam is a problem of really principles. Is Islam a political ideology or is it just a creed?
French philosopher Radu Stănescu is an Islamic expert who debates Muslim leaders on French TV.
It doesn't matter how many they are. The problem is the people who follow Islam are there somehow in a political party who has a political agenda, which means basically implementing Sharia and build an Islamic state.
From the 1980s until just recently, it was a social taboo to criticize or oppose Islam, and so the government and media effectively helped Islam spread throughout the country.
We were expecting Islam to adapt to France. Now it's France adapting itself to Islam.
About the veil, this Muslim says Europeans should respect Muslim dress. This woman says the veil is in the Quran, and we only submit to God and nobody else. Even if many government elites in France are in denial over Islam, the people in the streets increasingly are not. And they're becoming fed up with what they see as the growing Islamization of this country. They've started staging pork and wine aperitifs or cocktail parties in the street. They're patriotic demonstrations meant to strike back against Islam. Another national demonstration is planned for this Saturday. It looks as if a public backlash against Islam has begun. The French Parliament will debate a new burqa law this month. And this French leader has a warning for the West and for America.
We cannot accept the development of such practice because it's not compatible with the life in a modern society, you see? And this question is not only a French question. You will all have to face this challenge.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, Paris.
Well, Paris isn't the only European capital with a radical Islam problem. After the break, we take you to Brussels. Yes, Brussels, which has become a jihadist hotbed. Stick around. And welcome back. Well, Brussels is a beautiful city. It's the capital of Belgium. It's the capital of the European Union. And unfortunately, Brussels is becoming a capital of radical Islam. Some of the Paris attackers, for instance, hailed from Brussels. Folks, we saw this coming a few years ago. I paid a visit to Brussels back in 2012 to investigate Islamist-driven anti-Semitism in that city. Here's my report from 2012. When a radical Muslim murdered 3 children and a rabbi at a Jewish school in Toulouse, France earlier this year, French leaders called it an isolated incident. The numbers show otherwise. A recent poll found that some 24% of French citizens hold anti-Semitic views. In Spain, the number was 53%. And in Hungary, a whopping 63% of the population admitted anti-Semitic feelings. The same poll found this trend growing in Britain as well, up 7% since 2009.
This is a threat certainly not only to the Jewish community, it is a threat to the European culture itself, to the democracy itself.
Michal Gur-Aryeh is Israel's deputy ambassador to Belgium. Here it's gotten so bad that the Belgian government must fight the problem of Holocaust denial.
It has the purpose of educating, especially Muslim youth, about the Holocaust. Obviously, it is their ignorance that is leading to much of this anti-Semitism.
This large mosque in the heart of Brussels is a sign of the times here. Muslims now make up some 30% of the population in this city, and some say the rise of Islam is directly related to the rise of anti-Semitism in Brussels. One of the more shocking incidents in Europe's capital city came when 5 Muslim girls brutally beat a 13-year-old Jewish classmate last year, calling her a dirty Jew. Belgium now puts a special representative in each prosecutor's office to address this sort of hate crime. Still, one Jewish leader told CBN News that effort isn't enough for some in his community.
The fact that you have a lot of people, they are thinking about leaving, I must say the truth.
Dr. Maurice Sosnowski teaches at the Free University of Brussels, where he says the administration has been silent over the growing anti-Semitic climate on campus.
There are activists, I would say people from extreme left wing, associated with integrists. Those two, I would say, small groups are very active on the ground.
Sosnowski says this alliance drives a campus movement known as BDS, meaning boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel.
When there is a conference and you defend Israel, you cannot speak.
As war looms in the Middle East, some European Jewish leaders worry their communities will be targeted. It happened 4 years ago when Islamists and leftists led violent protests during Israel's operation against Hamas in Gaza. They vandalized synagogues and physically attacked a number of Jews. The hostility wasn't confined to Europe. Large anti-Israel rallies took place in some American cities as well, showing that the enemies of Israel are active far beyond the Middle East. Well, up next, we've all heard about radical Islam, but what about apocalyptic Islam? Find out what that is after the break. And welcome back. Well, ISIS and the Iranian regime, who we talk about a lot on this show, are more than just radical Islamists or jihadists. They are practitioners of apocalyptic Islam. Now, what does that mean? My CBN News colleague Chris Mitchell recently interviewed best-selling author Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem on apocalyptic Islam and what it's all about. Take a look at this interview.
Joel, it's great to be with you back here. A lot of things have happened since we last talked, and especially the biggest development is Vladimir Putin has come into Syria in a big way militarily. What's your reaction to this development?
We are watching a catastrophic capitulation by the American government in the Middle East. It was bedrock U.S. foreign policy for 6-7 decades to keep the Russians out of the Middle East. And yet we have, the President Obama and his administration have surrendered. We have withdrawn, we have surrendered, we have ceded the playing field to Vladimir Putin, who is a czar rising. He's an imperialist. He's dangerous. And the fact that he is operating with abandon, with complete freedom, militarily, just a few miles north of Israel is stunning and incredibly dangerous.
What are the consequences for the region and for Israel as well?
From my perspective, the first question you have to ask is, are we watching the preparations for the war of Gog and Magog? When you look at the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and if you conclude, as I have, that the historical, detective work leads you to that Magog is Russia, then you are looking for an evil leader emerging in Magog, in Russia, who will form a military alliance with Iran and a group of other countries that will come against Israel in the last days from the north. Now, in the 2,500 years since Ezekiel wrote that prophecy, Russia and Iran never had a military alliance, where they were never even friends. The last time Russia ever took military operations of this magnitude in the Middle East was to invade Iran at the end of World War II. Does that mean the prophecies of the War of Gog and Magog will happen soon or even in our lifetime? No. This could be decades or theoretically centuries off. However, when you actually have Russia and Iran fighting on the same side, just miles north of the mountains of Israel, it does give you pause. Iran, who curses Israel every single day of the year, and every few days or every few weeks says we're going to annihilate the Jewish state, Israel's going to disappear. Russia, look, I don't believe that Russian leaders, Putin namely, understand the apocalyptic eschatology or end times theology of Iran's leaders. I believe that Putin is a czar, he's an imperialist, he sees an opportunity. He sees President Obama cutting and running, surrendering, capitulating from the Middle East. He sees an opportunity to move. So I believe that Putin this is a power play for him, but he doesn't understand who he's working with. Iran's leaders are apocalyptically motivated. They have an end times theology. And that is so different from the way Putin sees the world. But the danger is that Putin could get hooked into an attack or a threat against Israel that he doesn't initially plan because he doesn't know who his partners are.
In all of the things that are going on, what do people in the West, particularly the United States, need to know about what's happening here in the Middle East?
Darkness is falling on this region, on the world, but darkness is falling on this region. Muslims are being slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands. There are more than 300,000 dead just in Syria. This is genocide. And it's happening right on the border of a country born out of the ashes of genocide. Every political leader in the United States has always said, never again. We'll never allow the Holocaust to happen again. And yet, the Obama administration is helping Iran on a pathway to having genocidal weaponry. Christians need to understand that these are dark times. Now, there's hope. Christ is coming, and we need to spread the gospel, and people are coming to Christ, Muslims, Jews, more than ever before, out of the chaos and the darkness. But the church can't wait for the American government or any government to do the right thing. We have a command, a series of commands from Christ. Proclaim the gospel, care for the poor, strengthen the church, pray for the persecuted, stand with the suffering, and that's what we need to be doing like never before.
Certainly a time to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem and the whole Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, what can you at home, do about ISIS? Yes, you can make a difference. Find out how after the break. Welcome back. Folks, when I travel around the country speaking on these topics, I'm often asked by people in the audience, what can we do? People are frustrated. They want to make a difference, not only for America, but for the body of Christ. There's a few things I believe you can do about this radical Islamic threat, number one, and number two, to stand with Israel. And that is, first, you don't have to be a foreign policy expert or a news junkie or a Middle East expert, but you owe it to yourself, your kids, and your grandkids to take 10, 15 minutes a day just to scan the headlines, read up on the news, and be aware of what's going on in the world. I think that is a necessity, a responsibility, especially after 9/11. I believe everyone should be doing that. Again, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Secondly, get with like-minded people. Look, it's never been easier than today with Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, to connect with people who share a common concern about these issues, and you can educate yourself as well. Think of the Tea Party, whether you agree with the Tea Party, disagree with the Tea Party. You have to admit they made a big difference, and they had large groups of people around the country making their voices heard. I believe we can do that about the threat of radical Islam and the threats facing America and Israel. Number 3, get in touch with your elected officials, whether they're Republican, Democrat. If you do not agree with their policies, their stances on these issues, let them know. Remember, they work for you, whether it's at the state or the local level, the federal level. They work for you. I'm in Washington, D.C. I can assure you, when you flood their offices with calls, they listen. They want to get reelected. So this is still the greatest democracy in the history of the world. Utilize it. Make your voice heard. That brings me to number 4, vote. Yes, vote. It almost sounds trite, right? Everyone votes. Actually, not everyone does. In 2012, for instance, 12 million Christians stayed home and did not exercise their right to vote. Let me tell you, folks, there are people around the world who would lay down their lives for the right to vote in free and fair elections. So we need to vote. No matter which party you agree with, use that right and vote. Number 5, and most importantly, pray. Again, it almost seems cliched. Yeah, I'm going to pray for you. No, really, pray. Pray for this country. Pray for Israel. Pray about these issues. Pray for a revival in this country, that America turns its face back to God, the God who's blessed us more than any nation in the history of the world. Pray, because I have to tell you, folks, to whom much is given, much is expected. We've been blessed more than any country in the history of the world. If we want to keep those blessings going, keep that favor in the eyes of God going, we need to pray and humble ourselves. It's not that hard. We've done it a lot during our history. We need to do it again to get past this latest enemy, which is the looming threat of jihad and radical Islam. So until next time, from the Watchman, thanks for joining us. God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace.